With this time that has passed by now, it is very obvious that the movie The Interview has been a total flop. Opening in only 331 theaters across the US, this first day, it really only managed to gross $1 million, which is extremely small and not anywhere close to the amount of money it would need to be if they were trying to make a profit, which was the entire point of producing this movie to begin with. However, the digital sales of the movie weren't really any better, but the illegal downloads of these videos was actually pretty good. According to the blog on torrentfreak.com, about an estimated 750,000 illegal copies of The Interview were downloaded as of about the time that this video was made. This is particularly sad when you consider that the US President Barack Obama essentially sold the movie to audiences, almost demanding that they go out and see it. The ridiculous cost of going to the theater today probably had a good deal to do with that as well. I've always wondered why people even went to the movies on Christmas Day anyway. There can be no denying, as a money-making investment, the movie has not been worth all the money spent on it, and certainly not worth the hysteria that has arisen as a result. My honest opinion is that this movie was bad, but it was no more worse than any of the other bad movies that have been produced in Hollywood. Because there's different kinds of bad. There's intentionally bad, there's lame bad, low production quality bad, all different kinds. This was the kind of trying too hard to be really funny and good and really not executing it all in the end. But it's really not worse than any other of the bad movies that Seth Rogen has put together in past times. This one's a little bit worse than them, but on the whole, it's for a bad movie coming out of Hollywood, it's pretty average. I've really only got a few criticisms of the movie itself, apart from all the other stuff that I'm going to talk about. For example, in terms of the art direction, they clearly didn't know the difference between Chinese, North Korean, and Soviet design. But this is also one of those things that you would expect Hollywood not to get right. In some instances, it was easy for me to tell when they were using a green screen chroma key effect, which has become increasingly more common nowadays. I first noticed this trend with Sacha Baron Cohen's The Dictator, which used it quite extensively. Around the end, there's a part where the two main characters are coming out of a tunnel during their escape. The woodland behind them is very obviously a backdrop. It's not even a real background or even a chroma key effect. It's literally just like fabric or paper. Now, this was just something I noticed. Kim Jong-un's death was nowhere near as big a deal as the media made it out to be. I can honestly say it was one of the tamest deaths I've ever seen. There was 100 times worse in RoboCop and The Terminator. This pic right here is actually the worst of his death scene. Now, as to be expected of a James Franco Seth Rogen movie, there was a lot of very childish humor, a lot of gay jokes, sexual innuendo, jokes about things going into people's rectums, just a lot of general childish stuff, the kind that you would see with any kind of stoner movie that seems more oriented towards almost a preteen audience, if you will. One particularly funny part was when Eminem was being interviewed. He confessed to being homosexual while proceeding to tell the audience that he had been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for everyone to follow and figure out. I actually thought this scene was actually fairly funny. Another thing I noticed was their depiction of New York City. Normally in any kind of movie, when you see like depictions of New York City, everyone's white. A great example of this is the show Friends. Friends barely ever had any person of color ever on the show, and thus we would get the impression from watching that show and many other Hollywood movies, unless of course they were trying to portray the atmosphere of crime and desperation, and then suddenly people of color magically appear. This is where I'll give credit to this movie in this particular case. There were actually people of color in the movie. Now, the one thing that throws this all off is the fact that there was a disproportionate amount of Asian women in every scene that had women. I mean, in New York, it was a lot of Asian women. Obviously, in North Korea, there'd be a lot of Asian women. And that was a theme that was running throughout the entire movie. Aside from the very sexist nature of the movie itself, there was a tremendous amount of Asian woman fetishization that came out through the movie. Now, this is not a new thing for Hollywood. This is not a new thing for society. But it's really obvious that this is the direction that they would go in, given the very nature of the movie itself. I mean, this is a very long-standing thing. You could almost call it a trope or a cliche or what have you. The Seth Rogen character falls in love with the Asian character who lives in the DPRK. It has the flavor of one of those old, like, white savior kind of complexes to it, where he's the decent, good, faring, responsible white American, and he's saving this beautiful Asian woman from the barbaric and backward society. Shogun was actually a pretty good example of this. It's more of a very white chauvinist position, where the white character is the savior who's saving these women from their own society, when in truth, white Western men have a very terrible reputation around the world. They are actually some of the biggest consumers of prostitution globally, and are the main drive for it, like they're the main consumer base for it. Not only that, but also for child prostitution as well. There's even another level on which this Asian woman fetishization is also wrong. It's inherently sexist and racist at the same time. What this does is it takes an Asian woman from being a person with her own thoughts and feelings and attributes and cultural beliefs and ideas and humanity, and reducing her to a sexual object. This is not much different than any other form of sexism that exists in society. This one's particularly orientated towards Asian women. We've seen this fetish over Asian women for a very long time. It's appeared in countless movies and television shows over and over again. This movie here is just another prime example of that. In other words, reducing these women to just their sexuality for their portrayal in the movie. It's inherently sexist and racist at the same time. What is really funny to me is how the movie was supposed to be turned into some kind of American cultural experience. The film and its insistence that people go out and see it, particularly Obama, was intended to be a celebration of the freedom of speech that Americans supposedly have. This was supposed to be a glorious act to show that Americans can go out and witness a criticism of those in power and have a great time doing it. It was meant to be a living piece of Americana and its quickly fading glory. The whole situation was intended to be made into an expression of rebellion and defiance against the tyranny that lies at the official story of America's birth in reaction to the English king. It seems as times have gone by, it's become harder to portray the U.S. as a victim in the world. Certainly most Americans think they are a victim in the global order. They're inundated with the thought that the whole world is against them and their own exceptionalism. The truth about the global order is really rather far from what exists in the popular consciousness of Americans. A lot of Americans haven't yet actually come to realize that in the world that they are the bad guys. They are the net beneficiaries of the tremendous violence that their country carries out across the world. And in some way, some people are starting to see this. There's rather of a reflection of that lately. You see, it's kind of hard to pretend that your own government, on the behest of the capitalist class, isn't really being a repressive force. People are starting to look inwards and starting to look at their own society, because you would just need to ask any black man, what do you fear most? Some terrorist in a faraway country, or the cop that's stopping you? Which one do you, sir, are you afraid of and think that's most likely to kill you? How appropriate is it that Obama told everyone to go out and watch this movie? The media could not have advertised this movie anymore. In the modern first world America, the struggle against a tyrant can be carried out by merely watching a movie. It was made out to be an American patriot's duty to watch this film. It's almost as though if you didn't watch the movie, the terrorists would win. And didn't a lot of people actually say that, even certain YouTubers? How capitalist is it that a fabricated threat by the DPRK is met with consumer consumption? It is almost dead on with capitalist ideology. The so-called threat from the DPRK is an advertisement that tells you to purchase the commodity that is the movie. This is what modern first world is, a great illusion placed over the eyes with no purpose other than to make you buy something. I can think of no greater expression of the exploitation of the third world. First world people can still feel like a victim, and that victimhood can best be fought by spending money on a mindless frivolity. One of the main points of this movie is to present the DPRK as a tremendous threat to the entire world. Look at the horrible human abuses that they carry out, which they didn't even actually show in the movie, but yet they continue to propound are actually there. I mean, this is repeated daily, even the most insane accusations that could be made, with literally nothing to back them up whatsoever. And this is supposed to be our duty, the imperialist duty, to come in and smash these people and hurt them in order to liberate them from all these injustices that they supposedly go through. Yet on the other side of this, we see the United States as the main purveyor of human misery in the world, the largest human rights violator in existence, or that has ever existed. For example, just recently with the CIA torture documents that were released, the report on it, detailed how the CIA was sodomizing children in front of their mothers, videotaping it in order to actually try to make them speak. Now, this isn't just a claim someone made. This is a report by the CIA itself that this is something that they were doing and are probably still doing to this day. It's not enough that they should sodomize children, sexually abusing children to try to make their parents talk. And that's almost cartoonishly evil, something that would be accused of the DPRK. And yet here it is, something very real, very actually evil. There's no reason for this whatsoever. This is evil, and it's being carried out by the U.S. government. It is admitted by the people themselves who are doing it. And yet there is no tremendous outrage from the American public. Where are all the countries in the UN, or even the UN itself, decrying this as a horrible human rights abuse? Where are they coming in and saying that something has to be done about America? There needs to be sanctions placed against the United States. There has to be a naval blockade. There needs to be an invasion, a humanitarian invasion of the United States. The recognition of these real, provable crimes against humanity go entirely ignored. And this is even if we ignore the millions that have been killed from the Iraq and Afghan invasions. Another great theme of the movie is the inherent racism all throughout it. Almost at every turn they're making some kind of racist joke, not just about Koreans but Asians as well. Some of these incidences in the movie reflect some of the worst racism perpetuated against the Japanese during World War II, some of the absolutely most cartoonish depictions of Japanese people, and all of it for the same reason. They childishly insult Asian accents, made fun of the way Asian words sound, comparing them to genitalia, and jokes about eating dogs. I cannot help but notice the lack of outrage at the racism. If these things were said about blacks, or even whites, there would be outrage. So why isn't anyone angry about it this time? Why is the media forgetting to even mention it? Particularly the UK Guardian. The answer is obvious. Because it serves imperialist interests. Making racist fun of Koreans and Asians in general isn't unacceptable when you're supposed to be at war with them. The same reason why there was a tremendous amount of anti-Arab racism right after 9/11 that went completely unchecked. There was no outrage because the American public is not only racist, but is taught to be racist towards certain people. The racism is justified in the eyes of the media and the public when the person it is targeted with is supposed to be the bad guy. One of the comparisons that I can't help but make is this movie to past notable anti-DPRK movies, particularly the remake of Red Dawn and Team America World Police. Now, with regards to Team America, I actually find it to be a little bit different. Team America wasn't intended to be anti-DPRK, meaning that wasn't the basis of the film. The anti-DPRK aspect was the enemy that justifies what America does, and the DPRK is the easiest one to do it with because nobody will defend it, and everybody believes the ridiculousness and the cartoonish nature that supposedly is the country itself. Team America World Police very explicitly defends imperialism. defends the Iraq War, the Afghan War, while making it appear as though it was being criticized. Look at all the damage they do, and then people get angry at them. They're like, whoa, why is everybody angry at us? But in the end, the message of the movie, when comparing the various genitalia and the anus, that still the America, the asshole, the dick is actually still needed, because they're the only ones that can do something about it. But never at the point of recognizing it that it shouldn't be there at all. In fact, the reason why it does all the things it does is because of something systemic, structural within itself. But that point is never acknowledged. In the end, Team America is essentially just a defense of imperialism itself. Now, when we talk about Red Dawn, we're talking about something that's entirely different. Red Dawn was literally nothing more than a very terrible propaganda film. This is just a remake of a 1980s classic that was intended to scare the population into thinking that the Soviets were coming at any minute, as the Cold War, as we learned later, was beginning to wind down. So the movie was actually very transparent in what it was there for and what it was intended to do. This new remake by Red Dawn is actually simply ridiculous. The thought of the DPRK, an impoverished country with only 24 million people, invading and occupying the United States, the richest country on earth with the greatest access to resources, probably the most powerful military in the world, of 300 million people, is just simply ridiculous. I mean, the scenario is absolutely ridiculous. It is intended to serve no purpose other than to reinforce the anti-DPRK sentiment that has been out recently in the past year. This year's actually been very bad for that. You notice that this movie comes out at the same time that a UN investigation on human rights is taking place, and believing the most ridiculous of statements with no proof whatsoever. So I don't really find that it's a coincidence that this movie comes out. And when the Red Dawn movie came out before, that one at least was just very transparent propaganda. Team America World Police was the defense of imperialism. This movie was intended to go in with all the fabrication of hacking and the whole fake scam, the false flag that this was, in order to whip up more anti-American sentiment against the DPRK as these so-called investigations are taking place. It's actually rather ironic to watch these depictions of Kim Jong-un, that he's crazy, he'll kill millions of his own people just for no reason, and that in the movie he's willing to kill 1 billion people just to prove himself that he's just like his father. These insane depictions of him as someone who would actually go and do these things, when that's absolutely untrue. The DPRK has no interest in just killing its own people en masse, and no country really has any interest in doing so. But look at this in comparison to who's making the accusation. The United States, the largest imperialist power that's ever existed. The United States alone is based on the murders. The foundation of the United States is on the foundation of hundreds of millions of people killed. Not just the 100 million Native Americans and the 150 million African slaves, but all the probably about 100 million that have died as a result of imperialism since then. The theft of Mexico, the theft of other countries for that matter. The whole mentality that Latin America is our backyard that they have. But isn't it rather ironic that all these fake claims of deliberate acts of evil, even killing millions of their own people, are actually coming from a country and an ideology that actually did kill hundreds of millions of people? Not necessarily their own people, but they did kill them. That he who is pointing the finger the hardest is the one that is the most guilty. One thing I did find very interesting was that one of the things the CIA said in the movie is that they were out to help a faction within the DPRK that doesn't like the Kim family, the anti-Kim faction, and that by killing Kim Jong-un, they would be emboldening this section of the government to step forward. But isn't this the same faction that they're talking about that was minimalized after the death of Jang Song-thaek? Well, there really was such a faction, which one can say has been adequately put in their place. But when we think about this whole thing about them being emboldened by having this assassination job, I'm thinking about, didn't the US do this with a certain section of the Iraqi population? Do you remember when the United States put the sanctions against Iraq back in the early 90s, and they promised that section of the population who would rise up against Saddam, go ahead, do it, and we'll back you up. And then what happened? Well, they didn't back them up when they rebelled, and Saddam Hussein crushed them. I do find it very, is the right word I'm looking for, ironic, that they would make this message in the movie the same one they tried to do in the end with real life in the past. And look at what the new regime that comes in at the end of the movie does. It comes in and says, oh, here's real free elections and whatnot. And we suppose that this new regime that's come in is one that's a bit more, how should we say, friendly to Western interests. Despite what the media has told us about this movie, is that the movie is very far from being just some innocent, funny movie the way that The Dictator with Sacha Baron Cohen was. In fact, it has been revealed from leaked emails that Sony, in conjunction with a think tank funded by the United States government, the Rand Corporation, actually put this together and actually conspired for a lot of these things to happen for national security purposes, essentially to put forward a lot of propaganda to justify the hostile acts against the DPRK and hostile to anyone who was sympathetic to the cause of the DPRK, like, say, I don't know, Russia, Venezuela, and Cuba. Now, I really don't have the time to go into that whole thing right now. There are links in the description for more information on that aspect. One small aspect of the movie I actually did notice was how the stupid character, James Franco, believed all the lies about the DPRK, how it's not bad. They're good guys. He fell for the fake store. He fell for all the stuff that Kim Jong-un was telling him that was tricking him into all of this. And that you would have to be an idiot to believe the DPRK side of the story. In other words, if you don't believe what the US and the Western capitalist media is telling you about the DPRK, you must be an idiot. And thus, anyone who doesn't believe the story put forward by the US must therefore be crazy and shouldn't listen. Anyone who might be a little bit pro-DPRK is someone that you shouldn't trust in their eyes. In the end, believe it or not, I actually really didn't think the movie was as bad as I thought it was going to be. I actually thought it was going to be like this really horrible, huge nightmare that was going to be disgusting, over the top, stupid, and ridiculous. But it was still fairly well done for something that was produced by Hollywood. So the movie, at least for me, wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, although it was still fairly bad and fairly childish. But I think this could be put best by Seth Rogen's character in the movie.
It is beneath despicable.
If you like this video and you'd like to see more of them, then head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you can go to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media.